Welcome to the Pain Relief Path podcast, where I dive into the vast world of chronic pain with the occasional help from knowledgeable guests from diverse disciplines that impact your chronic pain. I am your host, Dr. Pan Zhang, physical therapist turned chronic pain coach. I'm here to educate, empower, and encourage you to find your path to a pain-free life. Thank you for listening. Enjoy. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Pain Relief Path. I am Dr. Pan Zhang, and I am a chronic pain coach. And today I have a super special guest on. His name is Mason Trezise, like trees with eyes is how he just schooled me on how to say his last name. And he is an athletic trainer in the local area, and he works with kids at a local high school, from middle school, high school, and then also you work with a local college team, baseball team as well. So that is pretty cool. I wanted to have Mason on today because he gets a really cool glimpse into how kids work at different stages of their development, not just how they work internally, but also their thoughts on pain and their attitudes on pain. And you get to see a lot of cool things that I typically have never really seen because I have not really worked with a lot of kids. But especially with chronic pain, I am a true believer that that pain idea starts when you're younger. So if you get an idea of what pain is, if it's good, if it's bad, if it's neutral, that starts when you're younger, and then you can build a foundation from there. So I'm super excited to talk to you today about all this stuff, but I just wanted to open up and ask, one, what got you into athletic training in general? And then two, pain science and athletic training are kind of different ends of the spectrum, so to speak, because usually with athletic training, you're working with athletes. Pain science is not one of the big topics there, right? But first, yeah, why did you get into athletic training?
Well, I've been an athlete since as young as I could run or swim. I started swimming when I was about 6 years old. I competed in that for a long time. I ran track from middle school through college. I played basketball from like third grade through high school, played football in high school. So I tried it all. I feel like I've had just about every minor injury or moderate injury that you can have as an athlete. So I've experienced it. I've had to work through those. I never actually had an athletic trainer in high school, and I never knew what an athletic trainer was until my first day of orientation at college. I kind of wanted to work and be active and be outdoors. And I knew I wanted to do something in that realm. And I thought like, okay, what about personal training? But I had a really good advisor at the time, and he was like, well, what about like athletic training? And I was like, I don't know what that is, but sure, I'll try it out. So I took the intro to athletic training course, and I absolutely loved it. Everything except for like the insurance part, but like, I just fell in love with it. And year after year, the more I learned, I realized that it was really something I found passion in. I was actually a pre-physical therapy major as well, looking to, get my doctorate in physical therapy. But by the time I got to my senior year of college, I kind of decided I really, truly enjoyed being in the athletic training realm. And ever since then, I got a job out here on the West Coast, and it's fairly close to home, and I love where I'm at. And every year I just kind of fall more deeply in love with the profession.
That's awesome. So you work with, kind of like I said before, you work with middle school, high school, and collegiate athletes. So when did you start really looking into like the pain science aspect of those groups of students, and what kind of really spurred you to dive deeper into that?
I would have to say it really kind of sparked during football season, honestly, of my first year of my my career, essentially. You get these coaches that are like, hey, can you take a look at this kid? I don't think he's that tough. I think he's just kind of like, he's not really used to being hurt or playing football. I was like, yeah, I'll take a look at him. And I would continually look at these kids that have, never played a sport before in their lives. And the first sport they play is football, like one of the hardest hitting, like physical, brutally like taxing on your body sports, and that's their first experience of athletics. And unfortunately, some of those kids just never play a sport again because that's what their first reaction or their first initial experiences. And I kept seeing that pattern where there was these kids that had played sports for a long time, like they were in Pop Warner football, they played t-ball, like they'd done all these other things growing up as little kids in middle school, and they get to high school, and I mean it's same old for them. But then you have these other kids that they haven't really experienced pain so much. I mean, other than playing, running around the yard, trip and fall, and so I just kept seeing this need, not only in my own understanding of pain, but these kids' understanding of pain. And in my spare time, where I'm trying to learn more about the different ways I can help kids with my continuing education, it's like I came across a pain course, and it was actually by Adrian Lowe, and I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. And I kind of put it off for a little bit, and I ended up taking that long, I think it was like a 4-hour con ed course. And I found myself being more in tune and just like listening deeply and understanding, and just like being really interested in everything he was saying, more so in that 4-hour course than I had in any of these other like orthopedic type courses on ACLs and shoulder injuries and concussions and all that stuff. And this pain piece was really something that was kind of hitting me, and I was like, man, that makes so much sense. I get this, because we never really talked about it in college. Not really, hardly at all, I don't think, from a psychosocial standpoint or anything like that. And so I saw he had more courses, and I just kept eating it up. Like I took every single con ed course that I could from Adrian, and read every article that I could. And I've just been, trying to absorb it and utilize it in my practice. And I've noticed that the more I use it, the more that I just believe in understanding that, like, when you help kids understand their pain, you just get a bit better of a result, I guess. So that's kind of where I initially started getting into it.
Yeah. So what do you feel like, and first of all, I love Adrian's stuff. The fellowship of pain science that I just graduated from is his program. So he like spearheads that. So like I am definitely right on the same page with you. But what, out of like that first 4-hour course, what's like one of the things that really resonated with you that like hit home and you were like, okay, I need to dive deeper into this?
Kind of two things immediately hit me. And like the one saying that he used that I use regularly now is no brain, no pain. And that I could talk more, as I'm sure you also understand, like we could talk for a long time on that saying alone, but basically just understanding how pain originates in the brain, and it's more of a reaction of our environment that we're in, something that we've seen, our experiences, those kind of things that can relate heavily to children or younger athletes, when it comes to injuries, as far as an ACL. It's a big catastrophic injury for an athlete, puts them out, ends their season. You see some residual pain when they come back onto the field, even though that they'd passed every single jump test and everything inside the clinic. But as soon as they hit turf or they hit grass and they put on cleats, it's like there's some tension there, and pain seems to come with that sometimes. And it was one of those things where it's like, that's kind of a weird connection, like they didn't have any pain over here the last 3 months, and then all of a sudden, like, they're doing everything that they were doing in the clinic. The only thing that's different is they have cleats instead of tennis shoes, and they're on grass and turf rather than a carpeted or whatever clinic.
You get to see a big range of ages. Now, obviously in the clinic, I see like from like 20 to like 60-year-old patients. But at that point, most of the time, your thoughts and your preconceptions and everything's kind of cemented. So it kind of doesn't matter what age you are. But from like middle school to college, your brain is still developing so much, and you're still getting in all of this information, and you're still kind of figuring out the world around you. What have you found in your different age groups, from like middle school, high school to college, of the kids that you work with? What are some of the different conceptions of pain, and how do they respond to injuries and things like that?
Well, I mean, it varies, even year to year. Like your eighth graders, they're really just kind of barely hitting their stride as far as, figuring out their bodies. A lot of kids are hitting puberty around that time, or they're midway through puberty at that point. And so there's just so much changing with their body. I'll see kids go from football season where they're not very tough as a freshman, tough. I talk more on that later, but like, where they just they haven't experienced pain all that much, right? And then by the time I see them go through wrestling season and then get to track season or baseball season, like that's a completely different kid. Their bodies grow so quickly, and like whether it's physically or mentally or emotionally, like just the experiences that they gain in a matter of 6 to 8 months, like it's a big shift. So when it's going to be huge when it goes from eighth grade, soccer player to, sophomore year of college baseball player, like it's a huge shift. So when I'm approaching those things, I really have to look deeply at like, okay, how old is this kid? Am I talking to a 16-year-old who's played football since he was, third, fourth grade? Or am I talking to a baseball player who has played baseball since he was, same thing, like 12 years old? What other sports did they play? What kind of area did they grow up in? You kind of have to look at all the different pieces of this athlete. Are they, even as deep as like, are they a music major? Is their time slot just completely filled up with all these extracurricular activities? Is this the only sport that they play? Like there's just a lot that plays into it. And so you have to look at the athlete as a whole, and try to understand in that split second of a moment, like who am I talking to essentially?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, hopefully that's kind of answering some of that question.
Yeah, definitely. Do you feel like that's an approach that you took before you kind of dove into pain science?
No, I mean, partially, but for the most part, I looked at it in a very basic sense. It's like, okay, you play football, you're probably pretty tough. You wrestle, you're probably pretty tough. You run track, and that's it. You're probably, your body's probably tough in the long run, but like if I were to punch you right now, you wouldn't be able to handle it very well. Like that kind of thing. It's like I looked at it a very like square box. You fit here, nowhere else.
Yep.
But now that I've taken the pain science education, and I've also I've also studied a little bit of like emotional intelligence type stuff, kind of just looking at patients as individuals and their experiences, and talking with them, getting to know them. Like anytime we do any sort of evaluation, we sit down, we get their history. And when you're in school, they just say like, okay, what happened? Was it acute? Was it chronic? Was it, like we just look at the very bare bones, but the more you learn about pain science and the more you are in the field, you realize that our experiences in life and the things that we've gone through and worked through really influence how we interpret our pain and our injury. Kind of going back to like eighth grader, never played a sport before, plays soccer, rolls their ankle, it's the end of the world, like, oh, like rolling on the ground in tears, can't walk, has to be carried off the field. That same athlete, I could have them, fast forward 3 years, sophomore, junior in high school, they've rolled their ankle probably 4 or 5 times now. It's kind of a usual thing. That eighth grader, done for the day, probably out of practice for almost a week as they work back up to it, and they're taping it every day. Fast forward in time, you're working with them as a 16-year-old, and they've rolled their ankle multiple times. They roll their ankle in that game, I'm probably going to do a quick evaluation, make sure nothing's broken and that it's not a significant, they can still play on it functionally. And then I'm taping it up, giving them the extra support, doing a little functional test and say, all right, how do you feel? All right, let's get back at it again. So there's just a difference. It's the same injury, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably more significant since there's been repetitive damage to that ankle, at a 16-year-old. But it's our mentality and how we've grown around like and understanding the pain and the injury itself. And so I think that it goes for all different athletes, for all different injuries. I mean, granted, that's not necessarily the same case for all injuries. Like you have concussions, that's it's a much different realm, but still it's like when you're dealing with musculoskeletal injuries, it's kind of the same approach.
Right. And even with concussions, I mean, that's a brain injury, right? So
Right.
like you were saying, no brain, no pain. When you injure the brain, it is a different approach completely, but those psychosocial, mental, physical,
Yeah.
emotional things still play such a huge, huge part. I think it's really interesting that you are seeing these differences, like same injury, different point of development, different reaction. And they're all acute injuries, meaning that they just happened. So the people that I work with are chronic pain sufferers, but it's basically the same thing. You just have these in chronic pain, though, you just have people whose reactions have just been practiced, for lack of a better word, over time, right? And then this is now their pattern in responding to pain. But for you, you almost kind of get in there early at the beginning and you get to like break that pattern, like the bad habit, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. I love that. Um, you kind of mentioned a little bit before about, that toughness aspect of sports. And, we've all heard it, like the no pain, no gain, that kind of thing. I love to get your take on, I mean, because there is a little bit of like, you kind of have to be tough, but what is tough and what is like an injury versus what is, like you're saying, what is like that psychosocial limitation or contribution there. So I'd love to hear your take on like the no pain, no gain phrase, if you will.
I think, and I hear this all the time. I work at a high school that has more of a rural, old school, kind of gritty, tough reputation. Not to say that city schools don't have, gritty, tough reputations, but when you get out into the sticks a little bit, it's like there's a different expectation from the whole community, essentially. I mean, these are kids that grew up on farms and ranches, and they work hard. They get their hands dirty, that kind of stuff, calloused hands. And so there's a different interpretation of toughness, and sometimes toughness in that small town rural sense is, even if you're hurt, even if you're sick, you show up, you do your job. No, no matter the repercussions to that, right? Like you get somebody else sick, you get hurt worse, whatever it might be. Like you show up, you do your job. And so I think that's all fine and well until you do get to the point of, are we doing further harm? And are we putting these kids in a position where they don't really understand what exactly they're doing to their body? Because a lot of times they don't. They're just being told, I need to toughen up. So that means I need to continually run on this hamstring strain through the rest of the season. It hurts and it's getting worse, but I need to be tough, and that's what's going through their head. And it's kind of my job to kind of intervene for a moment and be like, okay, your leg hurts. Tell me a bit more about it. How did it originally come up? Like what's it causing as far as like your inability to do anything? Does it hurt to run? Does it hurt to jump, slow down, run upstairs? Like, when did this happen? How did it feel when it first happened? And be like, okay, is this just a muscle cramp or did you strain your hamstring? Okay, you probably strained your hamstring if you're getting these really sharp, stabbing, prickly pains, weakness, inability to do certain functions. We need to stop, take a break, because that's my opportunity to go in and say, look, you're causing further damage to this muscle tissue. And if we don't stop, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And for one, you're not going to be able to play your best, which you're not going to be able to give the team your best. And that's going to hurt us, right? So it's going to be better for you to, take some time, sit out, rest, still pay attention, learn all the plays, be involved, get better, and then give it your best for your team. Because, later down the road, you have all this scar tissue if you just continue to play on that. And then you have another injury and another injury and another. It just like, it never goes away if you don't take care of it now while you're young, while your body has that regenerative ability. And so like helping kids understand like, okay, you rolled your ankle. It's not the end of the world. We can tape this, we can get you stronger, and we can get you back into play appropriately. And that's where I think athletic trainers are really important as far as kind of stepping in and saying, okay, yeah, I get it. I love that you want to get back out there. I love that the coaches are encouraging you to, be tough and play through it, but we can play through it to a certain extent. Like, I'm going to have you just do a little bit of running, no cutting today, no jumping, no contact activities. You're still active. You're still keeping your conditioning. You're still getting in on the plays, but we're not causing further harm. And you kind of give them parameters to work with. And you, each day, you just kind of stair step them up. It's a graduated return to play. And getting them involved in those kind of settings where they're able to work through the pain and not just sit on the sideline for 2 weeks and then all of a sudden hop back into it after not doing anything for 2 weeks. There's a difference there as far as just how they can approach pain, because every time that they get hurt and they go to the doctor and they have to sit out for 2 weeks, there's nobody there to say, okay, well, you need to follow these steps to get back into play. And they just go 2 weeks out off the couch, back into full 100%. I'm going to say like 1 out of 10 times are they actually going to be able to just actually get back into play with no issues. Like, there's always going to be a re-injury. There's always going to be further pain. And there's just going to be this bad cycle afterwards. And so that's why I think it's really important to have athletic trainers on site to take that athlete individually, give them a plan, talk them through it and say, okay, well, if you start feeling this pain, we need to stop. And like you asked earlier, is like, what are those red flags that I'm looking for as far as like, what hurts and what is hurting me? I pretty much am always immediately asking, okay, is this an achy pain? Is this a sharp pain? Is it stabbing? Is it shooting? Like, I kind of want to see what the pain is. And then once they say, oh, well, it kind of just aches, I'm like, okay, when does it ache? Is it during activity, after activity? Kind of like during and after. I'm like, okay, so you didn't really feel any pain before. Does it get worse? And you kind of just have to go in deeper on those things. And primarily, as soon as a kid says sharp pain, I'm probably going to be like, we're not at a good spot. Like, sharp pains are usually pointing towards fractures, sprains, strains, and you're causing further damage. If it's just kind of tight, kind of achy, kind of sore, dull, those are the scenarios where it's like, okay, I can kind of work through this as long as it doesn't elevate. And also, again, using the pain scale. And I should be better about recording pain scales, but when you're working with kids on the fly, and I've got probably like 300 athletes every season at least, I just don't carry around a notebook to do that. And I just kind of mentally take it all in because I'm checking in with these kids every day. But like, and I'm asking them like, hey, scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the absolute worst pain you've ever felt in your life. What are you at right now? Like, oh, it's like a 5. Okay, 5 tells me it's moderate, it's bothersome, but it's not inhibiting. We can continue to kind of push through that a little bit. As long as you don't go past a 6 today through activity, I'm okay with you continuing on, getting in on stuff. But don't be doing contact activity today, and don't be doing like, any cutting and explosive type movements. Just kind of stay active. I'm like, okay, cool. And then check in with them the next day. Like, how did it go? How's your pain level? Did it ever get sharp? Did it stay achy? Did it get better? I'm kind of taking in all those things. And just, if you check in with them every day, kind of help guiding them day by day, they can better understand, okay, when it's dull and achy, 6 or lower on pain, I'm probably okay to kind of keep moving through that. And that's just a very general way of approaching it, but they at least are learning that I know I can do this, and it's okay to kind of push through that. And that's where that toughness piece kind of builds initially. And then the more they experience, the more they can build on that. Because really, the only person that knows you best is you. And I, as the healthcare provider, can only guide you in saying, like, you probably should avoid this and stay with this until you feel really good. And at the end of the day, that's the best way that I can help them, is helping them understand themselves better. And I think that's where that toughness piece really builds.
That's awesome. So you it sounds like to me you help them a lot with pacing back into activity. Especially if they've maybe been out for a little bit, and then giving them the safe parameters to work within and like really building on those parameters. I think really good foundation for, I mean, I spend so much time with my clients teaching those basics. If they have those as kids, it's really, really important versus just push through it no matter what, or sit out every time you have pain. Like those two ends of the spectrum are, if you live on either end all the time, it's probably not very healthy for you.
Right.
So with that, like you obviously work with kids to get them back into sport. Have you had kids where there's a lot of fear or there's a lot of resistance getting back into activity? And if so, like how do you navigate that with them?
I so pretty much like I just refer back to the old faithful graduate or return to play. Not just with concussions, you know, you get kids that are a little afraid to get back into full contact, ACLs, you know, chronic foot pain in a track or cross country athlete. They get hesitant for sure, as they should, you know, like you have an injury that keeps you from doing something that you love to do. And for a lot of these kids, maybe sport is the only thing that really brings them a ton of joy. And so those are those moments where I really take the extra time to sit down with them, kind of educate them. And we say, all right, look, just to give an example, one athlete I worked with this year, she's a junior, cross country, track athlete. Those are her things. She has every year seemed to have some sort of injury that kind of messes with her season. It throws her off of her training groove, or it puts her out. She's in a boot and she can't run for a couple of weeks. And track and running are her things. Like that is her release. And this year, coming off of cross country season, she was training all through the off season up to track season, didn't really have any pain until we got to the second track meet of the season this spring. And she started getting this really aggravating foot pain, right on that front, you know, part of the joint where you have to dorsiflex basically, or dorsiflex up. And she was getting pain every time she was pushing off and landing on that. And it was so much so that she was like, her times were just tanking and she wasn't able to really put her all into the races. And we had to take a step back. She went and saw a doctor. She ended up getting put in a boot. They did x-rays, they did MRIs, all that stuff. And she was really discouraged at this point. She's like, this is the third year I've had some sort of issue. And I just like, I don't know if I want to keep running anymore. Like it's so frustrating. And those are those moments where it's like, okay, I know you're homeschooled. I know what the situation is for you. Like this is your one time to get out of the house, come see your friends, you know, come train, run, all that. I get that. As being a runner myself, like I can kind of understand that on a different level as well. I want you to still show up to practice every day. I want you to be involved. I want you to continue your regular routine because it's good for your mental part as well. Don't mess up the routine that you already have. Still show up. I'll give you exercises. I'll put you on the bike. I'll keep you active. Okay. And then when they get back from their long run, you still stretch, you do the core workout, you do all those things, maintain your activity. And she's like, okay. And she's kind of like, you know, bummed the first couple of weeks. And she's like, I want to get running. I want to run again. And I totally understood that. It's like, just stick with it. And so basically by the end of the month where she finally was able to take the boot off, I was like, okay, great. We got x-rays are clear. There's no fracture. I mean, it wasn't a stress fracture. We don't really know what it is, but there's pain there. Okay. We know that everything is healthy and safe. And that was the main thing that I wanted to explain to her and show and make sure that she understood is like, it is safe. And then once they got that in their head, they were like, okay, I can continue to start getting back into activity again. So again, I refer back to that graduated return. She never really left activity. I kept her moving. She kept her core strength up. She was doing some biking. She was doing all these other little things to kind of keep her moving. So we didn't stop. She stayed her current training cycle essentially. when it came back to running, that's where we had the biggest issue, is that mental piece of it hurts to run, especially in the 800 and the 200-meter dash. And those were the ones that we had the most trouble with this year, as far as like either a longer pace type of run, almost a sprint, and those really intense sprints. And so it really just came down to, we need to stair step her up, show her that she can do these sort of training cycles in practice. And then when it came to meets, like there was two meets during the year where she just like, she mentally shut down because she was like, I can't run a 200 or I can't run an 800. But that week we had her in training and she was running repeat 200s. She ran a time trial 800, no issues. It came down to the meet where she actually had to put a ton of effort and a ton of energy into actually running hard on that ankle and that foot. It freaked her out. And so that like no brain, no pain piece kind of came in, you know? And so it was that issue of she was hesitant and pain was kind of the resulting factor of that. And so again, I got her back onto the track. We did time trials. We got her used to it, and she ran them multiple times a week. And then she got, and eventually we just finally got her to get over that mental hurdle. If you at first do not succeed, try again, essentially. Like, and we just kind of kept pushing it because we knew she was safe. We knew it was okay. She only had pain with competition. And so we just kept training and getting her up to speed and getting used to doing those activities to where it was just like, oh, this is no big deal. Okay. Yep. So now she understood that, and she was able to actually finally overcome that mental hurdle of being able to run those distances. And like, she ended up doing really well at the end of the year and being very grateful of like, okay, I'm glad I didn't give up. I'm glad I didn't quit. And it was one of those things where it's like almost kind of brings tears to your eyes, because you're like, yes, stuck with it, got the results we wanted. And it's not always that perfect fairy tale, but like it is very nice when you finally see that. And I don't think I would have been able to help this athlete the way I was able to had I not understood pain and the neuroscience behind it, and being able to walk her through and say, look, your body's alarm is just going off. It's just an alarm. Does that mean that there's an intruder? No, it probably means that a raccoon tried to get in through the back door because he left the garbage out. You know, like your house's alarm can go off for whatever reason. The smoke alarm can go off whenever there's smoke. But does that mean that there's a fire? I mean, or a big fire, right? Like it probably just means that somebody burnt something, like burnt the popcorn. It's the same sort of thing with your ankle. It's like you're doing an activity that causes an alarm. Pain is that alarm. And she's like, oh, I get it. And so when they can understand those metaphors, they're like, okay, it's just the alarm. I just need to push through it, turn off the alarm. We're going to get past it. And so that was one of those things where it's like, if I had not understood that and been able to explain it to them, I don't think they would have tried to run those events ever again. So that was the one that really hit home for me this year.
That's a beautiful story, and that illustrates so much where, like, yes, you have an injury, like pain is a good thing because it stems from your body's an alarm system. Pain's an alarm system. And when you have an injury, you need pain to tell you that something's going on, but then that can linger on beyond that healing time. Like you said, x-rays, MRIs, everything is healed. And it's just that mental fortitude that you have to build, and that mental leap of faith, essentially, that like everything will be okay if I push through this. And I mean, it's so interesting because kids are so much, I think kids are so much more malleable to those types of ideas and thought processes. And it took her, just a season, a couple weeks, couple months, just to get over that and like really incorporate that into her being, and hopefully future injuries as well. Because I mean, everybody's going to keep getting injured. It's just a part of life.
Yeah.
So that was a beautiful story. You're totally right. Definitely like a little like, yay, your heart, a little tear in the eye. That's pretty great. You said, middle school, high school, college, year to year, there's obviously big differences. And I can definitely see that from like middle school on, just because you're, sixth graders versus eighth graders look completely different. They're like a completely different species. Like when you look at how big they are and how they act and everything.
Big voice.
Um, How, since you work with a college baseball team here, how does that compare? Do you feel like the older students, are they a little bit more resistant to some of like the pain science education, or do you feel like they're as much absorbing it as like a middle schooler would?
I think them being college students, it really helps them be more open-minded. I think going from high school to being a college student, you kind of hit this stage of life where you're like, you moved out of the house. Again, you got to go back and look at like, who am I talking to? Okay.
Yeah.
And you see these college students, they're learning something. Some of these kids are even in the same profession, or they're going into the same profession that I currently am in. So I've got these athletic training or physical therapy or health and sports science kids that are baseball players, and they're still students, they want to learn and they ask these questions. So I find a lot of times that they are more open-minded, and they've had the anatomy classes, they've had the psychology classes, like they have a basis of understanding that's much, much different than your high school senior even. And so they're so much more open-minded, and they're much more likely to, take in and want to learn my experience, having been in the field already. And they're like, oh, wow, I've never actually heard of, the pain science piece. And so it's kind of cool because they go back to school after the summer, and I've had some of them actually come back the following summer, and they're like, yeah, I talked with my professor about pain science and blah, blah, blah. And they're thinking about talking more on it next year. And I was like, that's freaking awesome. Like, and so it's cool. Talking with just the different age groups. Like I tell people all the time, like we just finished up our high school season, and I just started our season opener with our summer league baseball team. And people are like, oh man, you must be ready for summer. I was like, I'm more so just ready to have a break from the high school and kind of work with some, a little bit more like mature brains, I guess, in a sense. It's like being able to have a little bit more of a mature conversation with these athletes as opposed to my high schoolers. You just make a different connection with them, which is cool.
Yeah, totally. That's awesome. And I know, I mean, even like 10 years ago when I was in PT school, pain science wasn't a thing. Like it was never even talked about. And now they're slowly incorporating it into different programs, and even some med schools are incorporating it into their programs, like just a little bit, and just dropping little nuggets, just enough for practitioners to be able to take it to their patients and understand, oh, there's something a little bit deeper going on here, versus just writing them off completely, which is what unfortunately, a lot of practitioners still do. But now I think there are more and more people who are like, oh, there's something a little bit more going on here. Let me refer you out to somebody who specializes in this or can really, truly help you, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one other question that I have for you, and I get this, when I was in the clinic, I was treating, the whole gambit of age groups, and kids, like elementary and middle school kids, sometimes high school, but elementary and middle school kids were the most challenging for me, not because the kids were challenging, but because some of their home situations or their parents were super challenging. How have you run into issues or scenarios where like the parent can maybe influence your athlete in a way that might not be beneficial for them, or like are they imposing their own like pain beliefs onto your athletes?
Oh, I definitely had a couple just kind of like shoot through my head. I guess the most fresh example I can give is, like I talked about earlier, I work at a high school in a more rural, roughneck type community. And I grew up in a small town. I get it. I understand. I was around that for the first 18 years of my life. So I understand that psychological piece to it, of expecting your kids to be tough. And I this year I actually had, right at the start of the season for basketball, one of our star players, probably the best guy on our team, although I don't want to tell him that because his head would he's a really good kid. His dad is one of those parents, like you can hear him in the stands at any game, anywhere. He's that voice in the stands, and it's rarely a positive comment coming out of his mouth, and it's frustrating. But this kid works really hard. He apparently had been doing kind of like 2-day training where he would go work out in the gym really hard, and then he would come to basketball, open gym. And one day he ended up rolling his ankle, like I think it was the first practice or the day before the first practice in open gym. And like I talked about earlier, rolled ankle, I'm not freaking out over. I'm not losing sleep, like I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, yeah, it's bruised, swollen, hurts. Especially if it's your first time, it's going to be pretty brutal, but we're going to get through it. I mean, 2 weeks max and you'll be back to pretty much 100% again. Like this is routine. If I can't, as an athletic trainer, manage a sprained ankle, I need to find a different job, because it's just routine. It's automatic. And so, and I get the kid up. I'm like, okay, can you put pressure on it? And he's like, yeah. And he's kind of limping and hobbling on it. But his dad was at practice for some reason that day. And I'm trying to walk the kid from the main gym to my athletic training room. And it's a little bit of a walk. We got to go through the lobby. And like the whole time, I've just got this parent, kind of just nagging at his kid the whole time. And he's like, hey, he's like making it the kid's fault. He's like, oh, if only you hadn't been, working out, and, you're pushing your body too hard. And it's like, it's kind of coming from a loving sense from the dad. Like, he's like, oh, you're just pushing yourself too hard. But also at the same time, like, he's making it the kid's fault for working so hard to be better this season that an injury happened. I'm like, look, if you're an athlete, you're going to roll your ankle. I don't care what sport you play. I don't care if you're running track, if you're a basketball player, football, soccer. You're not an athlete if you don't roll your ankle, basically. And he's making it this kid's fault. And he's just like in his ear. And I had a really hard time getting this kid to kind of commit to coming into the training room, to get treatment, to make it stronger, to do the rehab and get taped. He was just really flaky. And I can't help but to think that maybe the dad was, kind of influencing him to be tough and, push through the pain and, not get the help that he needed. And definitely, I do run into that a lot in that in my school. And it's unfortunate, but it's just kind of one of those things you got to work through, and it's just situation by situation. And that's, again, it comes back down to understanding who you're talking to as an individual. Who am I working with? It's not always the kid's fault that they're not coming in to get treatment, or that they don't want to understand, or that they don't, listen to what you're saying, because they've got a much more intimidating voice coming at them from the other direction, mom and dad, whoever it may be, telling them a completely different thing. And I get it, because, I'm just the athletic trainer and that's their parent. You're probably more likely going to listen to whatever mom and dad says. And so you just got to kind of do your best, and, hopefully that one day they kind of catch on and listen and understand as they get older. That kid's sophomore. So hopefully, by the time he's a senior, he's a bit more, mentally developed to understand that, like, okay, mom and dad might not always be right, and I need to start making decisions for myself. And so that's just your only hope that you can really give. And it's unfortunate, but you just got to keep at it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that just planting those seeds in their heads, and just keep planting those little seeds, and they eventually grow. And then it honestly, it's one of those things where I truly believe that when we talk to people about these things, even if they don't agree at the time when we're talking about it, or you feel like they're like 1,000 miles away, one day in the future, they're going to be like, I think I remember something like this. It's a conversation that athletic trainer had with me. So hopefully that will definitely, and it sounds like he's going to be an athlete potentially for life, at least not for the near future. So yeah, that's great. That's great. So if kind of just starting to wrap up, if you had one thing that you could tell your students, your student athletes, or your coaches, or the parents, in terms of one piece of advice in terms of how to manage pain, especially if they're cleared from tissue injuries and things like that, things are healed, their initial injury is kind of good to go. What is one thing that you would want like people in your circle to know?
I would say the main thing, the tell-all sign that I actually do tell parents and coaches when I'm not around, like, how am I going to handle this injury? If they cannot functionally participate in the activity that is going on, so they rolled their ankle and they just cannot run full speed, and they're hobbling on it like a hurt deer, like, do you really think that kids should be, like, from a common sense standpoint, do you really think that athletes should be participating in that activity? Or should they take a day to rest, maybe see their doctor if it's still bothering them, but like, it just, like, can they safely, functionally participate in that activity, whatever the activity may be? And if the answer is no, it's pretty black and white at that point. And so I feel like I've told that to multiple people, and that light bulb's kind of gone off, like, oh yeah, you're right. If they functionally cannot do it, they probably should not. Mm-hmm. So, and everybody knows what it looks like when somebody's pushing through a pain to do something, and you're like, they need to stop. Like, it hurts me to watch them continue to do, like, that's kind of what I'm looking at there. So yeah, that's what I always tell my coaches and parents when I'm not around to help.
Yeah, I think it's always that fine balance between, like you were saying earlier, just pushing and pacing somebody gently back into activity, back into full level of activity, versus telling them to sit out and be like, no, healing needs to happen and you need to facilitate that. And the more you facilitate it, the faster it's going to happen.
Right.
And I think that piece is definitely lost, especially in certain circles and certain subcultures with sports and things like that. That healing piece is definitely lost.
Oh yeah, and just kind of like the saying that I use for that piece is movement is medicine, and I say that frequently. And I'm like, movement is medicine, but we got to be smart. Yes. We shouldn't be pushing through certain things that are causing damage. We should be moving at a tolerable rate to keep us in activity. And that's kind of like, movement is medicine is just the one that I push heavily.
Yep. And I really, I can't remember if I mentioned this when you were sharing the story about your the runner, but the fact that you never took her out of activity and you had her keep coming in and still doing things. Number one, just the exercise itself helps with the healing process, but two, like you said, that mentally and emotional impact that you gave her, those positive impacts that you gave her, just having her come in, continuing to hang out with her friends, that's huge. That facilitates healing as much as rest and light activity does. So right. That's awesome.
I could go even longer on that. Like, just the stress piece, you get serotonin and all these other different hormones that get released with, stress. And those are actually causing damage and inhibiting healing and inhibiting your body's ability to absorb nutrients. And so, yeah, like those little details, as far as taking that extra time to just encourage kids to stay active. Like with her, it was her ankle, it was her foot. So everything from lower leg and up, totally fine to work with. I'm talking push-ups, we're talking plank from the knees, we're crunches, we're doing all these other things. You can swim, you can bike. Like, there's always a way to keep somebody active. Granted, you have tricky situations where it comes to like an abdominal strain, where the bulk of your core or the bulk of your movements originate from. It's a little bit trickier, and so you got to be more delicate with how you approach those situations. But like, at the end of the day, like, movement is medicine, and they're not going to get better if you're not moving them. Granted, yep. You have very severe scenarios with like C-spine injuries and all that stuff, but with the basic musculoskeletal injury, like, movement is always going to be medicine.
Yep. Even honestly, even some of the C-spine injuries, especially if it's affecting the spinal cord and the peripheral nerves around there, that blood flow from movement is super, super important. So just whatever gentle movement you can, even if it's from the C-spine, even just walking, if they can tolerate that, if they can do it, that's super important. So we are on 100% the same page with that. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Mason, for jumping on and talking about stuff. I love hearing about how people incorporate like pain science into populations that I normally don't see. And it's really interesting, and it's been a lot of fun kind of living through your experience too.
Of course. I appreciate you having me on. I was actually really excited to talk a little bit about this as in depth as we could today with somebody that actually understands what I'm talking about. So
Totally.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you guys for listening. This was such a great conversation with Mason. I loved seeing what pacing his athletes back into activity looks like, especially when he works with his younger athletes, and then diving into our different perceptions of toughness and that no pain, no gain mentality. Do you guys have any questions for Mason? Please feel free to reach out to him at mtrezise at proactivepts.com. That is mtrezise at proactivepts.com. If you were able to learn something new from this episode, I'd love to hear about it. Please leave a comment or a review, and don't forget to subscribe to Pain Relief Path. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.